start out by introducing yourself.
Okay. How esoteric should I be with my introduction?
However you feel, however esoteric you feel.
Well, I've lived in a human body called Steph for about 35 years, and that's been pretty interesting. For the longest time, and now in my 35th year, I'm starting to go back and unpack a lot of my childhood and realise so much of my destiny was set. And I was always quite interested in what's beyond death, not in a morbid sense, but out of a pure, innocent childhood curiosity. I was very grateful that my mum introduced me to some challenging concepts like philosophy at an early age, and that was really what made me turn my life into a yoga teacher. And I'd practiced yoga for about 13 years, though depending on when people watch the video that's not going to make any sense. It started in about end of 2007, start of 2008, and I've been teaching only 5 years, and I like to think that the practice provided a good foundation for that. So when I say I'm in the body of someone called Steph, I'm going to the extent where I don't over-identify with who I am and what I am as the ultimate experience of who I am. I trust and I have faith now that there is much more beyond everything I know and will know after my body's dead and from before when my body was born. And you asked me before, when we were having a really nice introduction to our conversation, if I thought it was possible for people in the real world to come to a state of self-realization, and my response to that is actually in the form of another question. What makes you think it's anywhere we need to get to? Because in that question, in the response of, well, how do you know you're not already liberated?
Because of limiting thoughts and thought patterns and all of the kind of the increase in mental health statistics that are just always increasing, it seems, and then sometimes decreasing. I feel like if we all were already at that stage, in inverted commas, then we wouldn't need to be having this conversation. Like how, at once gaining an awareness of, that fact that we are all just infinite, knowing that on an intellectual level, and then practicing to really connect with that, even if it's still viewed as something like a stage that you don't need to arrive at, it's just something where you already are. Do you think in this lifetime it's possible to, and I say this just for just so it makes sense what I'm saying, like get to that stage and then relay that onto your students or to other people who do you think it's possible in this lifetime to do that? Because they say that this state is experienced most profoundly in the moments before death. So yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a few aspects that I want to respond to that. But first of all, as we land back down on Earth towards the end of the question, hospice nurses report that the biggest regret most people had was that they didn't spend more time with their loved ones and that they focused too much on their individual work life. So that was a big lesson for me early on, before I really studied, yogic philosophy or, like Eastern traditions or spirituality at large. I didn't want to be caught in a position where I got to the end of my life as Stefan and thought, I didn't spend enough time with loved ones. And being fairly solipsistic in nature, meaning my personal philosophy is thinking that really my own personal awareness is all that exists, which sounds incredibly selfish, but in practice it doesn't work out that way. But being solipsistic in nature, I've taken a while to unpack why that is, and I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of it now, is that we are co-creating. And going back to your question of, raising mental health issues, when I was in Mexico in 2017 doing a retreat, I met some people that worked for a disability charity foundation out there in rural Mexico, who had profound wisdom and said to me, there isn't a disability of the individual, there is a disability of the society to care for and to support that person's individual needs. So without knowing it, we can very easily start to discriminate and to judge and say, this is good, this is bad. And this is just a form of conditioning. So conditioning's gone on throughout our lives to the point where if I ask the question again, what makes you think we're not liberated? It'll usually, if we keep delineating and asking that question over and over, come back to a source of dissatisfaction through a judgment made based on conditions. And then the second point that I want to address in your question, which I think was, I wouldn't, in my current understanding, and maybe the yogic traditions have a different definition. Let's not forget that words are just symbols, they're not the way. But the words knowledge and intellectual, for me, are different things. Intellect is discrimination, is separation. Knowledge is connection, is knowing. I don't have to ask you if you think you know something, you know it or you don't. Whereas intellect is in the realm of thinking. So we're addicted to thinking. Our mental health issues are an addiction issue, and the addiction is thinking. And all other physical addictions that come out of that, overworking, over drinking, overeating, they're all, if you source them back, to thinking. And this is what the yogic traditions tell us is the cause of big problems, clashes, if you like. So the Patanjali yoga system describes 5 major clashes, which are obstacles, and it says that they are liking things. That's a big one. Disliking things, okay, of course that's going to lead to suffering, but no one wants to, well, not no one, but a lot of people are not prepared to admit that my likes, the things that I like, the things that I see as worthy, noble, just, moral, they are actually hindrances towards recognition of the truth that is the knowledge of yourself. So, we get hung up on, I like this, but it's actually conditioned. And ignorance is another one of the 5. I think these are put in probably a different order by Patanjali, who tended to order things in terms of their most important first and then work it back from there. So he did with the yamas and niyamas, which a few yoga practitioners might have heard of, their yoga teachers speaking about and saying, like non-violence and truth. These are the first mentioned restraints, and yama means without. It means restraint. It means to hold away from. So it's saying that to be truthful and to be non-violent is actually a restraint based on a lot of the conditions that were already set for us when we're born. And a strong condition on the negative sense is the fact that we're taught, this is good, you should like this, and then we're conditioned to like things, not really fully with the knowledge of what's behind it. So the third one is ignorance, and it's the ignorance of the fact that the truth is plainly there, actually, and that we are this complete liberated being, and the thoughts that we've convinced ourselves of are actually the stopping block to realization. So realization isn't something you learn, and it's not something you have to work hard for. It's just remarkably simple, but the ego loves complexity because to pursue its goal of separation, it must discriminate and it must make differences, even though in the end those differences turn out to be completely insane.
And it likes to cling to things, form its own identity and be like, this is how it is. And it's certainly once you have an awareness of it, it's kind of overwhelming how, well, not overwhelming, that's it, it's just kind of like very shocking to see like how how that plays out in your life once you have the awareness of it, and then like starting to unlearn and unpack that and then the ego is just like, no, this is mine, this is happening. It's an interesting thing to observe, like on a personal level. It's a different thing to observe within the mind. So how do you feel like these conditionings, these judgments relate to race in the UK? Is there any experiences that you can think of where you've really seen this clearly come into play, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it means a lot to me, actually. My experience of institutional discrimination was whilst living in Australia for 2 years and experiencing connections with Aboriginal people of Australia, the native people, who have such a massive struggle. And I appreciate your question was about the UK, but this is a wider issue for me, and I think the fact that the UK is in the centre of it really harks to the fact that after being Anglo-Saxons for a while and mixing up with the French a little bit in our recent history, the English had a taste for raping and pillaging. They were like the original land pirates, and we are undoubtedly conditioned by that. We have to be. We're born into a space of an Englishman's home is his castle. It's not an English family's home is their safe place of loving care. It's like, no, you must also rape and kill in order to be successful. That's not the conscious exposition of it, but it's the subconscious shadow that's cast darkly and widespread across the face of this earth. The damage done by the English is horrendous. As little as 60 years ago, concentration camps in Kenya were happening because of British rule, and they'll call it British at the time then, but I think a lot of it was coming from London. And
sorry to interrupt, just for anyone watching who might want to look into that further, what would they look for?
You could search for the Mau Mau. So that was the propagandized boogeyman that was these terrible primitive Kenyans who were really getting in the way of British colonial rule. They weren't lying down and taking it like all the other good native people across the world that it just happened to go and and the damage done in India and Africa was just and France and to some extent different countries had big problems in Africa, but that comes from a deep place of ignorance, and probably the most impactful klesha of the fear of death, which is from an ignorance that so embedded in our bodies are we at the extreme. The empire of the British Empire, or whatever you want to call it, this idea that had been protected in and of itself, that we are separate and you must kill others in order to profit and survive, and you must get ahead, and it's all material. These are the reasons why like mass empire has just caused so much damage, because it's based on such an opposite idea to what nature intends for us, and native people around the world are the heart of humanity. Even though there's a great deal less of them now, they are the real noble people, whereas colonies from the West would try to dress themselves up with beautiful things that they'd stolen from around the world, fancy diamonds and gold and leopard skins and all of these things that made them feel materially like they were noble people, like royalty and royal families. But actually, those that love the earth and live and access the energies of the earth are really the noble people. Those tribal leaders, and few of them there are today. Now, Africa is a symbol of this because, there was huge nobility, and there was also huge mobility as well in Africa. They got to South America, apparently. There's a lot of evidence to show before the Europeans did. So they were traveling in ships, and they know it predominantly from tools that were used, very specific tools, very particular types of metal alloys that we used and found widespread in Africa, and they also found them buried away a lot lesser so in South America. And so the wider issue is that humanity is disconnected from its source, which we can recognize most easily as nature. Look at the imbalance in nature, and the Native Americans have some beautiful things to say about this, that we are not, the keepers of the earth, but the earth is the keeper of us, and we're just part of a wider system, But so conditioned are we that we are separate from the earth, and we must wear synthetic shoes and be fearful all the time. Lock yourself up in a house because someone's probably going to try and murder you, even though it's very unlikely that would happen, certainly if we lived in an open, loving community and society. And go out in the real world and travel and break your conditions. My biggest teacher was going away from the UK for 3 years and redefining what it was to be an Englishman. And it was remarkable, and it was also just so humbling because everybody was so loving around the world. And in the UK, if you go to a lot of places that aren't too indoctrinated with the conditioning of you must probably be afraid all the time. Again, it's subconscious, it's not conscious. People who feel that they need things to be complete are very deeply embedded in that condition. And it's not to say that they're bad and they should be condemned. They actually need more love than anybody else. A lot of these tribal cultures and communities will teach us when someone has wronged the rest of the people, they're taken into a circle and shown the utmost love and said, you are wounded, you need our love more than anybody else. So let's bring you back to your connection in that method. And this is a big threat to a society that is led from the top down, that says you must be in charge and you must also be more powerful than others, even though it's a complete fantasy and it's
only serves the people at the top.
Yeah, but it doesn't serve them. It actually destroys them. It destroys their humanity and their nature. So for this, we must be extremely compassionate and not say, oh, Donald Trump, what a wanker, and actually say that man is suffering a huge amount because he's so far away from reality that most people know. And reality is only what most people know. But most people are the community of Earth, and they're not the people in power. And what does that tell you? That the power system doesn't represent reality. It represents a fallacy that we uphold with our middle class beliefs, with our jobs, and saying, oh, well, things are like this, we better carry on. It's like, well, you can actually completely revolutionize yourself immediately if you choose to, but you don't choose to because it seems threatening to you. And many people are along that lines where they're afraid to revolutionize themselves. A violent revolution is not a revolution, it's a perpetuation of the problem that exists in the first place. What we are all to do is to go, what is it to be human, and how can I validate and verify that? So what's taken me away from solipsism is just the trust and the knowing that I am co-creating this with you.
Wow. There are so many things that I want to bounce off what you just said, but I know that you're short on time, so I'm going to choose a couple of things that I have in my mind. First up, you said that you went away. I'm just deciding in which order to ask these, but I guess it doesn't matter too much. You said that when you went away, you redefined what it was to be an Englishman. So what does it mean to you to be an Englishman?
To drink tea. I think that's probably the best stereotype we can go by. But I suppose it wasn't so much that I was looking for a new stereotype or a new prototype. I was simply just being identityless. And my only identity was I'm male and I'm English. And the appearance. But that was it in terms of the identity. So how is it to be pre-identity, and this is that we are all that, like when you were a little girl, you only knew you were a little girl because people told you. You just were awareness before that, and you knew that you were experiencing something, and now you know you're experiencing something, and that's the same. Noah.
But I think the same thing happens as what you're saying. You know, when we get older, we experience things, but then we're so conditioned with all this judgment that everything is kind of put into these little boxes. And
Eckhart Tolle says something nice about this. When you're teaching children, you know, if they say, "What is it?" and you say, "It's a keep cup," then that's not a great way to teach a child. But the better way is to say, they call it a keep cup. So you're actually allowing them to be in the awareness of what this is, of how you can observe its form individually and uniquely without saying it is just these already defined, forgotten, pre-prescribed set of limited beliefs. So it's about being able to decondition yourself, not as a finish point, like a yoga practice. It's not yoga perfect, it's yoga practice. It's ongoing. So the biggest insight that will help people in this is to maybe address the language that is being used, to speak always in the present tense, and if you talk less about future and past, you'll think less about it, and you'll know how it's going to pan out. There's an instinctive knowing. You know, it's not to say be neglectful of your current life, you know. You could, and many people do, I think, and then, you know, they just run away to India and sell all their things, and then the deconditioning is a process of prajna. And prajna is the awareness of infinity. Now we think of infinity as just a long time. Well, that sounds like a long time. It's not, it's forever. And the idea of forever is something that we have strong conditionings against. So it's good for us to be able to, how can I enter into this sense of infinity? And it happens. We're in it, always in it. So people think I've got to ascend in my yoga practice by opening my third eye, and I actually believe that, like, fucking close your third eye, you know, like, it's wide open and everyone's stuck in their head. There's a lot more intelligence that can help you to access knowledge down here.
It's like opening your third eye has to look or feel a certain way when no,
well, you open your third eye, it's going to see an advert.
So if you were to take what you know and hang on, let me think about how to put this together. So if we come back to the subject of race and identity, how do you think that the things that you know or the things that you've learned can be used to kind of make people just more, actually no, wait, scrap that. Do you feel like you experience the benefits of a white society, like in terms of like white supremacy as a white British male, or where are you from actually? What's your?
I was born in
heritage?
Bolton,
near
Manchester, second generation Ukrainian. So in terms of genealogy, if I'm like my elder brother, which I'm probably about 50%, sort of fairly same genomes. He did a DNA test. 67. His was 67% Ukrainian, Polish, and 10% Turkish, and a little bit of Greek, and 12% English or British. So yeah, I mean, I've never really fully identified as I'm an Englishman and I'm going to wear St George flag. You know,
because your surname just came into my mind halfway through that question. I was like, wait, no, let's not.
But no, you know, I said the seeds were planted from a young age. I was destined to be a yoga teacher because I knew that I was really interested in, you know. Okay, so to put this really directly, I've been meeting more of my, well, I'd say associates, because I didn't really have, you know, a deep connection with some black friends, and now, you know, I'm like, okay, let's talk, because this is a conversation that needs to happen. And a realization came to me in one of those talks with my friend, and I was like, oh my God, my childhood imaginary friend was like a Mexican meditator, and he had a big Mexican hat on, and he was covered in, like the sort of traditional like blankets. I don't know where I got that from.
Yeah.
And I always revered, the sort of bald monk, and I was just like really intrigued. And we had this book of, it's like a world encyclopedia, this little teddy bear that went around the world and looked at different cultures. And I was like, wow, look at these people are wearing like red makeup, and look at their skin. They're all like, they look totally different. This is amazing. Like, look at all this richness. This looks like different universes. I haven't been entertained by that so much in the media that I was receiving. Maybe just like fairly gross stereotypes of like what those cultures were, but early on, having a book of tribal cultures, it was really interesting to me. And yeah, I'm just trying to remember now where
I was just asking you, like, has there been any aspects of your life, like you've had like this awareness from a young age of, I guess, non-identity, like, given that where you've grown up, have you experienced the benefits of being a white male?
Yeah.
And when you have you come back to your mindset and your learnings? Have you come back to that, and how has that kind of like affected how you are perceiving this whole, basically just race in general in the UK? Like, how you live your life?
So how have I experienced maybe
how have you experienced
white privilege as
white
well?
Privilege, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is,
for,
you just don't think about it, do you? And that's what makes it difficult for people to empathise on a deep level. What this situation has taught me as well, which was something obviously foundations were there for me to be learning before, was, and I have an interest in the idea of consent and boundaries as well as an interpersonal spiritual practice. That everybody's individual interpretation is valid and unique and deserves to be heard, because it can help others to realise the fullness of their self, to the completion of their self. So no stone must be left unturned, but there are conveniently upturned stones because of this society, and the conditions that it's in are very formulated and relied on guilt, relied upon with guilt. We have like massive guilt complex, which is embedded in the shadow of our collective conscious of the UK. Yourself, you're on this journey as well, and you were brought up in this culture. Anyone who's second generation, that was born into, okay, so we basically own the world, and that means we're super hot shit. And if you don't feel like you're super hot shit every day, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, there's all of this kind of unconscious mess going on underneath the idea of I'm different and I'm better, which is what the culture tries to convince us of. And with that comes the humanity of, ooh, that doesn't sit well, and what's that feeling? Guilt? I don't like that. Let's avoid that. Let's shame that wherever it arises for whatever reason.
Hide from it and fight it off.
Yeah. And what it's teaching us is to go, now turn those rocks over, have a look underneath, because it's time, because there is knowledge for you there, and a lot of that knowledge is formed in compassion and being able to separate from your own ideas, so just beginning to look and to listen and to accept, and to like, when I approached a few of my friends and I was like, I want to talk about Black Lives Matters, there was some openness and there was some resistance as well, and there was some conditioning that had come up from traumatic experiences, and I was like, I want to hold this for you. I want to be the scapegoat for this. I will be the white man that is responsible. I'm going to play that role. I'm not, but I am, because I'm connected to it, and so are we all actually. And the dignity in which Black cultures, but all native cultures have approached this, many didn't fight back until it was too late, because why? They were uncorrupted and they came from a place of loving connection. They trusted that things would go as they needed to in the end, and it turned out to be a messy way. But you know, the hard part of this is going back to our original question, can we all be liberated? We all are liberated, but we just separate from that awareness. You know, the greatest sages, Ramana Maharishi, Krishnamurti, they'll tell us that, you know, we're actually just looking for a reason to argue and disagree. And those fluctuations, vrittis on a mass scale, cause disruption to the material, you know, from a toxic spiritual, you know, or a lack of true spiritual awareness, which is, you know, loving connection, not being stuck in the illusion of bodies and needing to be materially successful, and that material is success, which is truly not. I mean, even in the modern Western understanding, you just hear the loudest voices. You're like, oh, that person's got the biggest business, they're the richest person, or they're the most, you know, like we're just obsessed with sensationalism. But actually the profoundest impact that is made on this world with, you know, I believe esoterically, those who have the truest hearts and are able to be fully empty, but yet at the same time able to really contain what it is to be human to such an extent that goes out in their own communities or in mythologies about them. Jesus, Buddha, you know, and all of the other great modern day sages, you know, and holy people, they have such a profound place in people's heart that they create balance without even having to be there. And then further still, you know, there's a lot of people putting positive intention out there, and I've been teaching it a lot in my yoga classes. Like when you're creating a devotion, when you're joining in with an Om or simply placing your hands in Namaste Mudra, you're entering into that infinity. You're remembering and you're realizing you're disconnecting from your conditions. You're not being a person, you're being a yogi, you know, you're practicing being a yogi. And in your doing this, if you feel resistant towards it, it's part of your conditioning. But know that thousands of years, and you know, whatever other consciousness is out there beyond our own, there's been, you know, the intention of love, happiness, safety, wisdom, knowledge for all beings, and we're the receiver of that as well, but our guilt and shame blocks us from it. So if, to put it simply, in any situation, as a human conditioned in to what we know now, practice forgiveness of yourself and allow yourself to feel shame, and notice if those pangs of shame and those calls out to you internally, that if you can see them as actually an invitation to forgiveness and notice them for what they are, which is an attack on the divine everything. So, you know, we can't fight fire with fire, you know. As Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Yeah. Yep.
So, you know, instead we face these things with a sort of humility and surrender and trust and faith, even if it means you get your head cut off. You know, like when you're not attached to your body, you're not so worried about that, because you're like, well, I had a sell-by date anyway.
Yep. This body wasn't forever.
So the final klesha, overcoming the fear of death, is probably one of the big things. You know, in traditional cultures, death was right there. You know, the bodies were there. They weren't like shamed away. You know, there's this like we're trying to pretend we're not going to die as a physical being, and not appreciating the fact that it's one of the only guarantees. And instead of enjoying the time we do have, then, you know, we can just be in resistance and fear and ignoring the connection which is right in front of us, which is divine bliss, which is a sense of you created this, you know. And that's a hard thing for people to understand, is that we're creating our reality as we perceive it. So this is sankhara, and you know, sankharas are like seeds, positive and negative and neutral, you know, but they are those. That's how the addiction perpetuates, you know. One thought leads to another, one action leads to another ultimately, unless the awareness behind all of that is in non-action and non-consequence as well. But of course, one of our big conditions is you've got to finish the job. You've got to be somewhere where you're not. And this vritti just shakes us out of the bliss that we actually abide within all the time. So a good yoga practice physiologically will put you into a state of bliss without you having to try. You shouldn't be trying to meditate. If you're trying to meditate, you're not trying to meditate.
Meditation.
You're trying to do something that you don't know, that isn't exactly what, in Eastern culture, there isn't a word for, or rather in our Western culture, we don't have an adequate translation for the word meditation in the same way as it's culturally known in those traditions. Actually our meditation is based on the idea of thinking, because that's what our Western philosophers who were in this conditioning of separation, and passed it down ancestrally, we've got so much work to do, and lots of people are really interested in traditional cultures now, shamanism for instance, and yoga, of what because the thing is, the rape and pillage is still going on now intellectually with yoga. It's like, how can we make it like suit Western fitness? I'm going to make it fit. I want to sweat and raise my heart rate. Sweating's not a bad thing, but raising your heart rate is definitely not meditation, and it's not going to help your body or your mind, or your emotions for that matter. Subconsciously a lot of people are moving in a way for more than 10% of their practice where they're in fight and flight, which is the stress response. So that is, this addiction to thinking, this addiction to stress is a Western artifact, which is, we're still culturally misappropriating intellectual property, which is like yoga, and then saying, oh, this is yoga, I know what yoga is because I've got a certificate. And
I can do
it's,
all these things,
yoga is actually as much the state of presence than the practice itself. And this, even Patanjali says this, if you look at atmospherically, when he was writing he was a compiler. Patanjali is who most people are basing their yoga practice on. A lot of modern yoga teacher trainings teach Patanjali philosophy, although some teach others, but he compiled the systems of the time, as opposed to being a sort of a satellite of like this wisdom in its original conception. He was like, no, these are the systems, and this works better than this, but you can do this, choose this, try that, like it was cataloguing the spiritual knowledge at the time, which said yoga is the state and not the practice, so that's super important for people to appreciate, is that actually I'm doing yoga. Are you? Are you experiencing yoga? Are you experiencing yoking connection at every moment, or is there seeds, sankalpas of separation in the actions? Therefore, if I say I and mean Stefan the man who is currently sat opposite Kayya, or if I say Stefan the I, that is the eternal bliss that is communicating to himself through these conditions to remind itself of who and what it is, then it's a different I. So this is why words are just a signpost and not not concrete.
To come back to the subtlety within,
and to knowing, have faith and know.
Surrender and try and not force things and not force yourself to think and be and feel a certain way. I think is what the healing and educating ourselves is the root of kind of, in my opinion, kind of.
Healing suggests we're sick, and educating ourselves suggests we're uneducated. So those are the seeds